Hello everyone, this is Space Café podcast, and I am Marcus. So I've been playing with this new toy for a couple of weeks now, an evening pastime that literally drives me crazy and steals my precious Netflix time. More specifically, I visualize text inputs that I feed to an artificial intelligence. Like, show me what a 1 kilometer tall rocket in the jungle would look like. I don't even know where to begin, but there's a larger revolution happening right here before our eyes. A revolution that's about to shake up the entire entertainment and art industries. How long have we all been rock solid convinced that AI will never, ever take the creative industry from us? Okay, and now I'm sitting here right in front of my computer saying, so show me what the first life on Earth may have looked like, or show me a high-resolution photo of a black hole, or, now it's getting a little creative, show me a selfie I take with an alien on Mars where my smile is just barely visible behind the scratched glass of my visor. And I'm not talking about the usual computer graphics here. No, this is about mostly photorealistic interpretations of my AI request. I'll post some impressions on my LinkedIn profile later. Why am I sharing this here? Because something is changing right now, and we are witnessing a massive transformation that many of us would not, or maybe would not have yet expected. But revolutions rarely adhere to that anyways, right? Today we have invited someone to our studio who is trying to push the boundaries in a completely different corner of this world. A corner that may be a little closer even to us here in this podcast and my little evening pastime. And we became aware of that little project, well, quote unquote little project, through the hashtag NextSpace, with which the aerospace giant Airbus is exploring new business areas. Do we have a drum roll? Torsten, drum roll, come on.
Thank you so much. I feel very welcomed.
You are, indeed. Thank you, Laura Todd, the Vice President of Space Exploration and Future Programs at Airbus, for accepting the invitation and joining us on the show.
In fact, I think people said, Laura, you're a bit too direct, but I think that's the Scottish character. Yes, it's not what we're renowned for, the Scots.
So Scots don't lie.
They tend to be very forthcoming.
Okay, good. Looking forward to that conversation.
It's not a problem. I've already done a barbecue today. They had a bit of sun in the UK, so obviously that means barbecue weather. And I think it's a nice way to polish off the afternoon.
Why don't you introduce yourself with a quick lowdown on who you are and what you do, what you like, what you don't like, so people get to know you.
Okay, so my name is Laura Todd. I am currently the head of Space Exploration Future Programs in Airbus, which quite often people are surprised when we talk about Airbus and put space exploration in the title. So I'm looking at what do we want to do for the future and the why we want to do it, which we'll go through in the discussion. But prior to that, so I've worked for Airbus for quite a few years now, more time than I would like to admit, in the sense of making my age known. But I've worked through commercial aircraft in particular and looked at the end-to-end value chain for what we do, how it all fits together, and the why. And one of my drivers in life, though, has always been, so I studied aerospace engineering, but I have always been fascinated more about the human exploration in space and how can we positively advance that and influence it. And because for me, human exploration in space is something that is important for humanity, not only for the usual, we pioneer, we explore, the innovation, but also for the benefits. And so this is one of the things that I'm keen to discuss today, especially, is how we communicate with people. And this is something I see in my role at the moment. How do we demonstrate to the everyday person that all that technology, the same as kind of like with the iPhone, that it's not just a one-off for that particular product, it's how it benefits you in so many different ways, and that evolution of the technology is something that's important for the day-to-day human existence. So this is something that I'm very much keen on, and also the way of working, which when you ask what I like, what I don't like, I find we've got a major challenge in that we focus on this whole topic of an individual program or an individual mission, and not looking at that why question. Why is it we're doing something? And then again, coming back to the what and the experience, we get too focused on the details. So this is something I'm hoping to change in what I'm doing in my current role.
You know what? I keep hearing the issue that you're talking about, that communication issue, for such a long time. And I think we are not able to find a solution to that. We keep repeating that same gospel and story all over again. We're failing to communicate the importance of science, the importance of those big moonshot projects, why that is important. I mean, like, I wrote the communication strategy for the next Collider project at CERN, and I was confronted with the same issue. Speaking of the current situation we're in, we have the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, we have climate change, we have huge economic challenges globally, we have migration challenges, and then comes along someone and says, hey, I need, 50 billion or whatnot for a particle collider. I need 10 billion for a space telescope. I need whatever kind of billion for. So what is it that we're doing wrong here?
Well, it's relating it to everyday life. Okay. And this is part of I was on a panel in January, and there was this excellent facilitator, someone called Torsten, lovely chap, who asked exactly this question. And we talked about it's got to be, and I always take the example, I've got family members that are not into science, they're not into engineering, and have a different prioritization. I've got a sister, she's got 3 kids. And she's more interested in, I've got huge energy bills coming. I've got the shortages of food in the UK for whatever reasons that those are occurring. And so when I speak to her, when she's saying to me, why are we spending billions on these topics? Now, what does my sister enjoy doing? So it's not just saying, oh, you wouldn't have your mobile phone without it, or you wouldn't have GPS. It's you wouldn't be able to communicate on Facebook with your friends and family. You wouldn't be able to get directions to that restaurant that you wanted to go and try with your husband at last minute because you didn't have that functionality on Google or whatever other platform you're using. So actually translating it into real-time daily events for people is important. And I think that's not what we do, because we get focused on the science and technology and the details. Can you imagine if we were talking, I use my iPhone for health and fitness. If someone starts spouting to me, this is the spec of the chip and this is the material breakdown that's used, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how does it benefit me as a person on the day-to-day. And it can also be scary for people when they hear the numbers. And again, how is it you can do that? And yet we're having water shortages because of a drought, because they didn't fill the pipe systems. So, and then, translating that, well, if you didn't have this technology, it would be much worse. And then saying how the situation would be, not being able to do instant messaging. Do you want to go back to the days where you had to go and write a letter and wait for an answer through the Royal Mail, or would have a postal system? So this is where, again, putting ourselves in what's going to be heard for different categories of people is important. And we're engineers, we're scientists, we enjoy that detail, but that community is already convinced. There are billions of people on this planet that are where children are starving, or there's countries that are in wars, and they're saying, well, I don't see how this is the priority. But yet, then we translate it to that money's there to spend if it was chosen to be prioritized. But it's not, because that is the nature of humanity. And there are shareholders that need to be paid, and money needs to be made, or else businesses will go bust. So you have to balance the business elements and show there is a long-term investment potential, but at the same time, how that evolution is going to deliver technological advances.
I totally agree. And maybe let me add to this. Maybe we are lacking relatability to many of those things because we're lacking understanding of what is going on. And once we are lacking something, we are not evolving commitment. We're not producing compassion for something. It's like with nature. We don't care about nature because we have lost touch with nature. We can't even name a tree out there. And once you don't have a name for something, you don't care because you do not relate to it. And so you don't give a damn if it's cut down or not and made a commodity. So, and maybe the same holds true for that kind of field that we're talking about, technology, exploration, and whatnot. Maybe it's that kind of translation that makes things relatable, perhaps.
It absolutely is, but it's also speaking the right language to people as well. I mean, I spoke recently to an 18-year-old who has just finished college, about to go in the next steps of their lives. And I asked what they thought about space exploration. And they said, oh, it's bad for the environment, isn't it? And then what was more interesting is they referenced a TikTok video that circulated only a week ago, as I understand it, where it had 18 million hits in a week, explaining why the lunar landings, the moon landings were fake. And, all this is going on outside of that community where we're like, oh, no, it's completely real and we're all on it. But someone else is communicating something completely different, and they're influencing younger generations in particular. So also understanding the different communication channels are in place, and how do we reach those people? Because I've got a 12-year-old nephew that's constantly on TikTok. And I remember when he was younger and he used to be excited about what Auntie Laura did and, aircraft and whatever else. And now, with the nature of how things are in schools and how young people have social media and digital presence, and we're not even talking through that. We're talking still through the old channels. And yeah, we don't even know how to speak digital to a lot of the time to younger people. So yeah, that for me is what I see as a challenge. And then you hear they say, I'm not even inspired by the topic. At school, everything to do with space, it was so dull. It was not presented well. Exactly. It was, I just find that shocking. I mean, because I was pretty bizarre as a child. I mean, from a very young age, I saw space and I was like, I want to go to space. So, but this is, I just don't think we're speaking to the people that are already singing from that hymn sheet. We're not thinking, how do we include the wider community? And then to allow that to be prioritized. And when we see the spending that's done, for example, in Europe, it's very difficult for member states to go back to their taxpayers and say, oh, we decided to spend the same as like NASA on this. And immediately, again, it'll be, I'm sorry, you're not fixing the water pipes. I got flooded twice in the last year, whatever. And this is part of the challenge. So to show how those benefits will come, and we already have those benefits, but it's not overnight and it's not instant gratification.
In your role as the Vice President of Space Exploration and Future Programs at Airbus, what's your solution to that?
Well,
big question.
No, it's a good question, by the way. I like the question. 30 seconds. That'll be a great short answer then. For me, it's first of all the why. The biggest part of the why, and that's why I genuinely, when I look at it, the key areas for me, again, technology, technology that is not going to be used purely for a mission or program. It's about building blocks of capabilities and functionalities that I can apply across the board in different markets for different benefit. Okay, so there's that one. There is the inspiration one. And these are in no particular order, because I've had some people say to me, shouldn't inspiration be first? But it is about inspiration. I don't know about you, but I go outside, I look at the moon, and I just think, I can't believe that we're launching to go back there in a few hours, for example. So there's that. And then there's the collaboration aspect for me, which, if we take the complexity of the end-to-end value chain, it shouldn't be one company's doing it all or one country's doing it all. It's taking advantage. And I think this comes from my Airbus background, where we are I think, you can tell me if I'm wrong, the best example of a company in Europe that effectively collaborates with taking the expertise and the know-how from different countries, from different areas of technology, and putting it together for something that is used for a purpose. Okay, not just for the sake of doing it. If we take Airbus commercial aircraft, for example, it means joining people up. It means going to different cultures and locations. Yes, we build a cool product that's cutting edge technology, but there is a reason for it. There is a demand for it because people can see the value of it. So there's those elements which are, for me, the purest sense. But if we're also honest, there is the economical aspect to it. It's not to say, and I think, again, this is where, as a society, we expect this instant gratification and immediate return. It's not to say, oh, I invest now and I get a huge return in 2 years. This is a long-term game, because if we take, and my particular focus on this is the lunar ecosystem, once the lunar economy kicks off, the cislunar economy zone, it's going to explode. It's a question of when does that happen exactly? And you can't say when, because that depends on how good are we at collaborating and breaking down those individual building blocks and evolving them and iterating them and improving them in a fail-fast way, so a lean, agile way, that we start to see value earlier. But it means we can start to exploit more also, or explore more in the exploration sense, the wider regions of space, starting obviously with the moon and then further out. So that's, for me, what I focus on in my role. And, I'm really lucky in that Airbus is a company of, our purpose is about pioneering and looking at how we can add value and again, bringing together the different elements to make the whole. So that's how I see it. But again, like the baby steps. So it's not like you try and do the perfect thing right away and do the most complicated mission. What's the first step? And then how do I evolve and build on that, but with a solid framework, with an architecture that is scalable? Because I think that's another challenge we have. I don't know if you could imagine that every aircraft you decided to start from scratch. That would be absolutely nonsensical, and we wouldn't be able to go on holiday for however many euros on EasyJet or whatever other company you like to use. But this is the same thing. So we've got to break this mindset of what's been done in the past, or we will start from scratch and do a really heavy process and try and build perfection. And we've got great examples recently of people that have done exactly that, or companies that have done exactly that. And the obvious one is, of course, SpaceX.
What do you make of SpaceX?
I think it's the best thing that could have happened to space exploration, to show that you can do it differently. What surprises me still is, though, that you talk to people. I love startups. I love we have this, when I started speaking with people on space exploration, they talk about new space and old space. I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about, quite frankly. It's about startup mentality, lean, agile mentality, and a way of working that you've got the why, you see the what, and then you allow those different building blocks to be built in an environment that can be creative and can try and can fail and can learn and improve. And that was what made the big difference with SpaceX. And yet, when I speak to people that have been in the space industry for years and years, it's always still, oh yeah, but these startups, they'll never succeed. And I find that amazing because, and I also often hear from people, oh, you need huge amounts of investment. I genuinely beg to differ. You need to be focused on the investment. You need to not be trying to do everything in its dog in one go and do that minimum viable product and then improve and iterate. But
you know what? It may sound far-fetched, but I think there is some truth to it. Whenever people do not know what they're talking about, they talk about money. So if you have no understanding what good wine is all about, you would say that bottle costs $100 or $1,000 because that's the only thing you can say, because you're lacking the ability to assess the true quality because you have no experience. Same old is true for the endeavors we're talking about. When we're lacking that why, when we're lacking that vision, we usually go like, okay, there's a 40, 50, 100 billion euro project that they're after. And of course, that's not the story, because I mean, like, if we had that vision, if we had that why, money does not play a role.
Exactly.
And if it's $1 trillion, it does not play a role because there's a bigger story to it. And this is what we're missing.
Well, I think when you see the cost basis, for example, for SpaceX, and people, they can't get their head around it. Like, no, we still need to spend 3 times as much as SpaceX. And I'm genuinely just thinking, I don't understand. You've got the facts and figures in front of you now. So where is this coming from? And you're exactly right. And coming back to the why, for example. So, and again, making it relatable to people. When we talk about, when we talk about going to the moon, right? So it's like, so what? We go to the moon, we go around a few times, take a few nice selfies, come back, bring some space rocks. What was the point? Whereas how I like to communicate it, and on this whole lunar ecosystem, I said, you've got a couple of people who've just come in from their day's activity. One of them maybe have been doing some radio astronomy in nice conditions because they can. Someone else has been doing some scientific research. They sit down, they have a meal, they open a nice bottle of said red wine. I would go with a Cahors or a Corbière. Your choice. And they sit down and they do that. And it just so happens, though, they're on the lunar surface. Okay. I'm giving the normality, the context of the situation. I can apply it for various other things. So I talk about the more scientific angle, but then like about the manufacturing angle, what we've yet to discover in terms of manufacturing processes in a different environment, and what are the new things we're going to learn, the resource utilization and everything else. But so I've given that user experience, that user story, that epic in lean agile terminology. And then to say, okay, what do I need for that? Well, I'm going to need habitation. I'm going to need energy because it gets a bit cold on the moon. Sure. I'm going to need good resource management because there's no bin men that are coming on a Friday to collect the rubbish. So I could start to break it down into the different technological capabilities. Then I start to break it down further. Okay, I'm going to need this, this, and this. So then it's manageable now. It's in bite-sized chunks. And then again, the important thing is, how does it fit together in an architecture that makes sense? So that when you do like an app update, you don't have to do a huge cleaning of all your applications because it's against the framework and the structure, the operating system. So this is something as well that we're really trying to push. And again, it's because it's something that we use in Airbus methodology anyway. But you can speak through that. And then if I've got those different elements, well, if I'm able to manage energy to such a point that I can have sustainable human presence on the moon, I'm pretty sure I'm addressing some challenges on the Earth. Resource management the same. And then we can break it down. And not to mention all the other great science and research and development that we do on stuff like 3D organoids, looking to the future of medical science, the whole producing oxygen and the regolith conversion and whatnot else, the new power systems management, we use what we've always used. We haven't had any breakthroughs, but to get breakthroughs, we need to put ourselves in that position. Necessity is the mother of invention.
But you know what? The fun thing is that in those past 3 minutes, when you were explaining that why we want to go to the moon, you were painting a beautiful picture what could have been done in communication and what was not done. Because what is ringing in the back of my head still is that NASA is going back to the moon.
Yeah.
No, we're not going back to the moon. We need to think forward. We're going to the moon because this time we are ready to stay for good. That's a story that I would be inspired by. I'm not inspired by a story where someone tells me, well, we want to go back to the moon after 50 years. I mean, like, come on.
I can't disagree with you at all, because I have my vision of why I want to do it. But yeah, this is again, though, this is the thing. If you've got, and it's not a criticism, scientists and engineers and whatever else. I have met some amazing people, both for aerospace engineers or material electrical engineers or space engineers, and scientists, and they're amazing and they've got such great ideas, but they don't necessarily effectively communicate it to the audience to get it moving forward in the right way. And then there's something else I'd like to touch on as well, because talking about amazing people, right? Because I hear often, and the question's been asked, we did a conference recently with ESA, is Europe lagging behind in space exploration, whatever else? How many people do we have in Europe that have got a breadth of subject matter expertise, that have knowledge, that if we were to put them in the room together and allowing them to develop on those bite-sized capabilities, do you know what I mean? And not hindering them with the overall processes and getting it perfect first time and going through extensive quality gates and et cetera, et cetera. And again, we go to SpaceX. Elon Musk adapted the DevOps and Lean Agile principles for software development because it works just as well for physical hardware program development. And he allows people, and the quality is inbuilt in the system. Okay. And we've got this mentality. We need to have lots of reviews and do all this, that, and the other. We've got so many amazing people that, again, when was it SpaceX started? 2002.
Yes.
2002. And like less than 10 years later, they're successful launching. I don't agree that we're behind in our ability to deliver technology or successful missions or exploration or whatnot, how you want to put it, a product. What I feel is we're behind in our mentality and way of working to allow these people to do their thing, to be creative. And this is where we see a lot of people, they go off to these other companies. And we had exactly the same thing in the software industry years ago, where there's no reason why a Silicon Valley should not have been somewhere in Europe as well. But that mentality and way of working, and then also that long-term vision as to the why, coming back to it. And it's not about taking risk. It's just about that bigger picture, I think, because we take risk on a lot of things. But it's something else that I feel privileged in, that with Airbus, having those different cultures, and oh my goodness, there's a lot of cultures. So it's not just a nationality. It's again, like if you're an electrical engineer or an avionics engineer or whatever else, you're going to be speaking different ways and different languages, but having those different perceptions and perspectives and bringing it together. But again, against that why, what is it? Like I said, it's two people sat for dinner. Tell me, what do we need? How do we break it down? And then again, breaking it down into the bite-sized chunks, instead of trying to be so detailed and prescriptive of exactly how it should be done. This
Absolutely.
is, Go on,
By
sorry.
the way, all good. A quick disclaimer to our audience: Airbus is not paying us to do that podcast. That's important. But we figured it's interesting to hear from within the industry, and this is why we have you, and thankfully have you here on the show. So you're not paying us. We're free to talk about whatever you want to talk about, what we want to talk about. Of course, Airbus makes money in the aviation industry and in space, and this conversation should also be seen from this perspective. Let's not beat around the bush here. So I just wanted to make this clear. But Airbus, I wanted to tap into this very early on. Airbus is part of my personal pop cultural upbringing because Airbus has always been around. Even when I was a child, Airbus was a thing. The rivalry versus Boeing and the big planes, 380 and all those stories around. So beautiful stories. So it's part of cultural memory to me at least. Now we are talking about space, Airbus in space. So what does that mean?
One of the things that we do, and I shall try to avoid saying the word Airbus so much as well, is we don't do everything. If we take the planes, we don't build everything with the plane. That would be absolutely ridiculous. It's a very simple thing. I mean, it's 85% procurement. It's working with supply chain. It's working in collaboration with partners. And this is what I want us to shape it in that way, which is because we're good at industrially, we're good at that architecture and infrastructure, because that then enables, again, your smaller startups and SMEs to focus on their area, but make it fit into an overall architecture so that it can more quickly be developed. I'm working and talking right now with a lot of startups because I don't want us to be doing everything. We shouldn't be doing everything. It's not our role and it's not the benefit we have. We're a global company with a European heart, essentially. So how can we use that? Because now, again, don't get me wrong, we are in business, but to advance space exploration in a sustainable, in a environmentally friendly way, but also in a way that's going to deliver benefits more quickly, rather than constantly reinventing the wheel or being in competition to try and do the same thing. Or, I mean, don't get me wrong, competition is healthy and it brings out creativity, but not when you've got 10 different companies that are doing exactly the same thing. All I see is the waste on that end-to-end value chain. And we come back to the end-to-end value chain. If I need to get from A to B, what is the quickest and most efficient way to get there? That's the easiest to operate, that is the simplest for the user. That is what we want to drive in that space exploration discussion. The lunar ecosystem. Our heritage is not to do the habitation or to, to do all these different elements. It's to take what we're good at, for sure, but then also enable that platform so that other people can go on that end-to-end value chain. And that's what we do. It's that kind of big picture thinking. So that's how we're driving it moving forward and towards that purpose. So again, the lunar ecosystem is focused purely because it's around the corner. It allows, I mean, don't get me wrong, taking low Earth orbit is especially the area for rapid testing and failing and whatnot else. But once you're starting to look at sustainability and human presence, it's just around the corner, easy to get to relatively. But also for the whole resource for fuel development, for as a launch base to go elsewhere, what's available on the service, what we going to develop when we're there. So these are the reasons why that should be a first step, in my opinion, but also with the gateway and whatnot, the NavCom systems, various topics that are going to enable that to scale up again, scalability, and then do expansion towards other areas such as Mars, the asteroid belt.
So what is Airbus's piece of the pie in the future? So what is Airbus focusing on in space? So is it what kind is it? You said it's not habitation, so what is it then?
Well, I mean, habitation such as building something on the lunar surface. Yeah. So we talk with different startups, and many wonderful startups doing that. But then look at the launch. So the European service module. That comes from Airbus. It's providing all the setup, the power, the life support, propulsion. We've got, it's essentially, if you're looking at it, it's transport, logistics and infrastructure, the things that we do. And again, though, it's not us saying we're doing every single element of it. We're enabling that end-to-end value chain for the end user experience. So there's that aspect. There's a nav and comms aspect, because we've got our subsidiaries, we've got the smaller areas where we're using, they're developing new technologies as well. They're developing new satellites with SSTL and these kind of topics. So we're looking at the lunar lander again, and we're getting to the same thematics as the whole transport and logistics and stuff. So this is something that we're looking at globally, but what's important, and it's not specifically what exactly are we going to do, because anyone that tells you exactly what they're going to be doing in 15, 20 years, I'm having doubts about the authenticity of their message.
Yeah.
It's breaking down that end-to-end value chain and saying, what are all the elements that are needed to develop or to deliver this end user experience? And that is what is important. And then how do I make sure that I can iterate and scale and evolve that in a way that I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, which is what causes the huge costs.
You mentioned the S word a couple of minutes ago, meaning sustainability. So how does sustainability go together with space, the space industry?
Well, this is a great question, and I haven't got a perfect answer for you, but it is something that, again, if you haven't got sustainability, how the hell are you going to manage with having a human presence? This is part of the challenge. Look at the reusability that SpaceX introduced practically immediately on its rockets. It's and environmental sustainability topics and everything else. Again, the technological benefits of how you reintroduce that into other areas is vital. So but the importance is the scalability and the reusabilities, certainly. But what are the new things we're going to develop when we're not restricted to the Earth's environment and gravity, for example? I have no clue. So this is something as well that I'm confident we're going to develop.
How bad is a rocket launch as opposed to your traditional transatlantic flight?
So it's funny. I literally had this conversation yesterday with someone, and you know what? The impact of that globally compared to, I don't know, cattle is much less. Same thing on, but it's true. Yeah. I often have this conversation with people, especially when you hear everyone saying, "Oh, the government should do this and that," and they should, by the way. But if we look at everyone stopped eating meat tomorrow, I can tell you that's going to be a huge contribution in terms of positive contribution towards climate change. So comparatively, it's not as bad as a lot of other things. And we could go into the population, the amount of people on the planet, which incidentally is another reason why we need to explore and grow off planet, because we see what happens when we are too many in one small space. But this is, again, look at the industrial revolutions of the past, where you had London filled with smog and whatnot else. Yeah. If you hadn't done that, you wouldn't have got to the next levels of industrial innovation. So, and I appreciate it. So to say now, we should stop doing it, well, I don't think that's going to help the problems today, because there are so many other contributing factors. And then it's a balance of what does that bring in terms of value, such as you get to see your loved ones. Look at the time of COVID when people couldn't see their family for 2 years. And how that has a huge impact on mental health and well-being. So there's not a simple answer to that one, but again, it's something that being able to have a human being live on the most harsh environment we know, have heat, fuel, oxygen. I don't know. I think we've overcome some pretty major challenges that can be applied. And in Airbus, we already do that. We already do carbon dioxide cleaning, the submarines. We've really looked into the oxygen production. So this is a lot of our research that's going on. Clean energy. How do we do the next steps on that? Look again at Elon Musk. So he decides, I'm going to now do space exploration because he has that why, that vision. We should be a multiplanetary species, probably for similar reasons that I think. Then he said, I'm going to do the next electrical car because the car pollution is bad, and we need that in terms of developing the next batteries and electrical energy sources. If he hadn't been doing that, it wouldn't have pushed the next level. So
before we will have made it into space for good and live in space for good, we will need that transportation. We will need those rockets. So how about biofuels? Is there anything interesting going on in that field?
There's a lot of interesting research on biofuels, which I'm sure you're aware of, in particular, and you know, it is important to us, especially because there is this question, more so for aviation, obviously, than for space exploration. But this is exactly what we're researching. We've got some aircraft that run on biofuels, and then it's a question again of how to make it sustainable. So how do we have green aircraft for the future? Because people are always going to need to be able to connect. So we're not just going to stop doing that tomorrow, because the impact, again, on the mental well-being is going to be huge. So that's something that we research a lot into. You have to appreciate this, and this is where the investment is needed, though, from governments and member states and whatever else, because if you transfer the cost of that to the paying consumer, the passenger, the person that, you know, is buying a ticket to something, it's a little bit more difficult. And again, you can appreciate, because there's so much that's being paid out on so many different topics these days. So this is where the investment coming from institutions and from governments is vital, that will open that up and will push that technology. I mean, the mission of ESA is a great one, to really enable the technology developments so that they can be applied across different areas. But I think, and coming back to the European question, this is part of the challenge, though, not to say, I'm going to give you this money to invest, but I have to have my conditions met, my criteria. It's too constricted. There's this whole major thing with the geo return, for example, which it's stifling innovation in that sense, just because to say this percentage has to go to this country, in the big picture, in the big scale of things, there will be the huge return, but maybe not on that one specific mission or program. Yes. And this is, again, coming back to that way of thinking. It shouldn't be, when we introduce Lean Agile on digital for Airbus commercial, this was really something we had to push an understanding for people. Just because you provide the funding doesn't mean you get to dictate how it's spent. What you say is the why, the user experience, the end what, and then let us do our job. Let us, as industry, apply our knowledge and expertise to deliver the best value output. But if it's like, no, it must be this percentage this and this percentage this, and we want to see these companies do this and this, that, and the other, it's not a long-term thinking way of doing things.
Say what, because you mentioned ESA already. Do you think ESA is headed in the right direction in all of this? Because you could think that ESA is brilliant in technology and engineering and is rather weak in the why, in the communication. So do you think ESA is going in a hopeful direction with the new directorate?
Oh, absolutely. And so I haven't had a long history working with ESA, but the people I've worked with, and in particular looking at the strategy, I definitely think they want to go in the right direction. I think the difference is, though, it's they should be giving the why. They should be giving the what, but not the how. This is for me, if you're trying to do everything, then it's like I would get frustrated if we say you tell suppliers exactly how to build things. Well, what's the point of having a supplier? And by the way, I don't like the supplier-customer relationship. Again, I'm on the end-to-end value chain. This is the value component needs to be done. Give the interfaces clearly, and any specific...
And come up with a solution.
Exactly. And this is where we see the difference with startups, where they're really delivering that minimum viable product instead of trying to deliver the perfect solution. I mean, could you imagine if we never got a car until they built, like, I don't know, an Aston Martin or something, then we would have still been on horseback. So this is getting past.
But that's the NASA approach, right? The redundancy approach that makes things extremely costly and long term.
And yet SpaceX is not.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happened there then? And it's if we take it back to let's take the US, the whole gold rush back in the day, and the government, they built the railroads, which enabled the business and innovation and entrepreneurs to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
If they built the railroads and said you can only do it like this, and this is a percentage and this, and nothing would have happened.
Exactly. You know what? Speaking of railroads, this is a completely different topic now, but since you're mentioning the gold rush, there's an extremely interesting story about the synchronization of time, the global synchronization of time, going back to that gold rush moment. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. So when timepieces were developed for the first time, like mechanical timepieces, you could show off that you're a wealthy person if you own such a timepiece. And in those days, before the railroad times, there was no communication going on between like village X and village Y. So a person in that village had his or her own time.
Yeah.
So it could be like 3:00 and the next village had like 9:00. Because there was no synchronization going on. But then comes the railroad. So you needed to synchronize in order to know when the train comes. And that's a really, really interesting story, how everything came into being by connectivity.
That is a wonderful example of the different blocks you need to have that effective end-to-end value chain. That is, that's lovely. I think... It kind of, for me, it ties in nicely with all the stuff in terms of robotics and the automation and artificial intelligence, which are not necessarily unique to space, obviously, because, we use a lot of it here on the Earth. But having that at the right level for that next step in terms of specific user experiences will enable us to advance more quickly. So... That's a lovely story.
Nice.
I didn't think of it like that.
Laura, there's a beautiful term that caught my attention within Airbus, and that's called #NextSpace. And could you talk to it a little, what this is all about? Because this opens my interest, of course, and my heart and whatever can be opened. I'm super curious to hear what NextSpace is all about, because this may be an interesting place to listen to when it comes to novel ideas, innovations for, I'm not saying new space, but for space.
And this was exactly the purpose of it. So thank you very much for introducing that. It's to say, what is next in space in terms of what can we do with it? How can we advance in it? I've already talked your ear off about the lunar ecosystem, but when I look at some of the research that we're doing, for example, medical science, so 3D organoids, and what we've successfully done in launching cells, and they've multiplied and grown. I learned the term organoid, 3D organoid, by the way, because I'm not a medical person. So I was like, what on earth is a 3D organoid? So having communication and functionality. And apparently it's very difficult to do on the surface of the Earth, but we can do it in space. And then when you can see how that can evolve for future of medical science, not only for testing medicines, but looking at, I don't know, organ development for the future. I mean, probably long term, but still, you need to do that first step. What I just talked about in robotics and artificial intelligence, I mean, you hear things about space-based solar power, for example, something that we're looking at and working with universities. How do we build massive arrays to channel solar power? But how can you use it either for the moon or for the earth, using it as a sunshade? All these different great ideas that people are having. And we're trying to provide that environment that they can start to build on it. And how can we apply it in a useful way towards a why for the future? And it's a great example. So if you're going to build a huge solar array, you know what? You're not going to be sending out a person to do it, depending on the location. So you need to have the robotics. You need to have smart robotics that are able to self-assemble themselves. And this is something, again, that we've developed in R&D. We do it in collaboration with different institutions. They self-assemble, they maintain themselves, they build these big arrays. So these kind of things is, when we say what's next in space, it's not just focusing on, I'm going to do a mission, like in the sense of we know it, or a one-off, and not to say they're not important when we look at what was launched with James Webb, for example, but it's an incredibly highly complex one-off mission for a very specific purpose. So we're looking at more, how do we open up space? How do we allow that, again, scalability, evolution? How do the different use cases can be applied on the Earth, or to problems we want to solve, or are going to allow us to be more pioneering and exploring in the future? So this is essentially what is next in space. And how do we encourage, and again, coming back to communicating, especially to younger people, how do we encourage them to look at that? And we've got to give them those tangible scenarios as well, to say, this could be you doing this. So that is part of the purpose.
So how's that connection with younger people working? Do you feel like there is interest, or do you think, okay, there's a gap we need to fill somehow?
I think it depends. I mean, obviously it depends where you are, but I'm looking at the communication channels. And I gave the example at the start of our conversation about a TikTok video that someone sent out saying dubious messaging. I'll be honest, I haven't got a clue how to use TikTok, but clearly there's lots of young people that are doing so, and whatever other social media presence that we need to be looking at. Yeah, I think this is something that we could all work on together. Just because it's in a newspaper or someone does a press release doesn't mean it's going to get the message to the right person. And if I may, if I think when I was younger, so you had Star Wars, you had Star Trek, especially for me, it was The Next Generation. So that was my preferred choice. But, things that were really more inspirational and showing this normality in space. And today as well, I think it's all about action and, I hate to say violence, but more aggressive kind of things. And there's not that.
We are upping the intensity levels and intensity game. So we're not happy with a traditional dose of inspiration. We need it on steroids.
Yeah,
that's how we work, or how we are made to work, maybe. But I completely understand. I'm a kid of the 70s, and I grew up with Carl Sagan, one of the major inspirations in my life. And I'm lacking such a person, to be super honest, because Elon is not that person. He is a different type of guy. And well, can you think of a substitute? Because like Carl Sagan, he was a unique personality with a unique talent to communicate and produce inspiration.
That's an interesting question. I shall reflect on that, and I will come back to you another time on it. But I think, again, though, we've got to first of all be clean on our message, right? So, I talked about. Here's the other thing. Okay, so we look at next gen space stations. I prefer to say that than post ISS. Okay, sure. I don't think. I think ISS, the International Space Station, has been a marvel. I think it was a great collaboration for multiple countries. However, we've got to think
it's the beginning.
Yeah, it's the beginning. And we've got to think to the next steps, which is, what's our next gen space stations and why are we going to have them? And what are we going to need for them? Because it can't be something that is only for the rich that can pay a fortune to subsidize a launch for an agency, or for highly qualified astronauts that were selected over years, and anyone that doesn't have 20/20 vision and it's perfect measurements on every limb are not going to do it. So these kind of things, and we've got to be thinking in that way. And it's again, and do I believe we could do this? Yes. We're working on that in Airbus with various different amazing ideas that startups are having. What are the systems that we can provide for life support? Because it's something we've done a lot. But then again, it's the why and how do you apply that? And when we can talk about things like that, then we can start to look for, okay, who's the best person to communicate it and how can we get them to communicate to the right level? I mean, the whole influencer generation, I missed that, thankfully. So it's not something that I aspire to. But however, this is the way to communicate with certain audiences. So yeah, it's looking at the different steps of the why, and it's not a one communication fits all, or not one role model that fits all. Unfortunately, in this day and age, the amount of information accessible to people through digital and social media and all the various news outlets and whatever else, and the thousands of TV channels or whatever streaming services that they have. The Netflix special on Elon Musk, for example, there's a great series for mankind which looked at the space race between Russia and the US in a completely different, absolutely mind-blowing.
Really great.
Yeah, really, I very much enjoyed it. So we've got all these different aspects, and I think we've got to just be a little bit more open to thinking in different ways, and ask the people themselves how they would like to hear information. So,
absolutely, Laura. We are getting closer to the end of our show, and we have two unusual questions.
Okay.
And question number one: you already mentioned that already as a kid you were planning to go to space. Maybe it's the time for you. What kind of Spotify playlist would you bring along? Tell me one tune you wouldn't want to miss. Because we're setting up a Spotify playlist for that podcast. So each guest has one tune to offer to go into space with.
Right. So I'm imagining you've asked this from a lot of people, so I'm not going to be obvious.
No, so Major Tom is taken.
Okay.
And Space Odyssey is taken.
There you go. Do you know what? I swear this is true. So my friend that I'm visiting, we listened last night to the ELO album Time from 1981. And there's an awesome track on there called Ticket to the Moon.
Wow.
And really fabulous on this album, I found, is it was a conceptual album, and it was a guy from the 1980s that's transported to 2095, where technology is advanced, that there is people living on the moon and whatever else. So I thought, in terms of time scale, and I'd never heard it before, so I literally listened to that last night. So I will go with that, and I'll thank my friend Lisa for thankfully making me listen to it. Thank you.
Great. That's very inspiring already. Speaking of inspiration, question number 2. And it's a question that now we're in episode 62. So every guest has answered that question so far. This is the Space Café podcast. It's a coffee place. In coffee places, you energize yourself with espressos. So what's your espresso for the mind, for our audiences you would like to share? How would you now want to energize or inspire audiences? You can pick whatever kind of topic you want to pick, whatever comes up.
So not necessarily for space exploration or...
Whatever.
If I was going to say something, the inspiration I would say is that every person has an individual value and knowledge and expertise. And if we were able to respect that and see how that works, again, in that end-to-end value chain, we could achieve a lot more in whatever that we're doing, rather than always assuming everything you must do everything yourself. And I think that's something that really, just sitting around a coffee shop, just imagining what each person in that coffee shop, that you don't know them, but they must have some special talent, some special skill, some value contribution that they bring. And just imagine if we were able to effectively channel all of that and put something together of value. So if we're going to speak specifically of coffee and inspiration, that would be the thing that pops into my head.
You know what? I commute on a daily basis to my workplace and public transport. So whenever I'm standing at the train station, of course, I get to see hundreds, thousands of people. So I was like, if only like my smartphone could show me with a sign over their heads, people of similar interest.
Yeah.
So just imagine you would look at like hundreds of people and you have a bunch of people with flags on their heads that have similar interests. So I would immediately approach them and have a chat with them.
It's
because
very complimentary. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So we should come up with something like this. Hey, Laura, it was really fun. Thank you so much for taking the time. That was really inspiring.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I can't wait to see how the playlist grows then. I shall download it on Spotify when it's available.
You should, because you're soon going into space side.
Thank you so much, Marcus.
Thanks for being here with us today. If you like, head over to Spotify and get the playlist of our show. Just search for Space Café Podcast Guest Tunes. As I said, every episode, a new track to the soundtrack, the very personal soundtrack for you crazy space nerds. Thank you for your loyalty. See you next time. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.